All right, we're going to call the workshop to order. Declaration of a quorum, 7 members present. And move to item C, public comment. Ms. Horn? All right. Move to item D, workshop session. Item 1, Board of Trustee picture. Mr. Martindale?
If you will all follow Mr. Glenwinkle to the studio, he'll get our annual Board of Trustee picture for all publication purposes.
All right, that was brutal, but we got it done. So, all right, we're going to move to item 2, consideration and discussion regarding employee health care options in the 2022-23 year and beyond. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Warwick. I'm checking to make sure everyone got back, all 7. All right, we are good. With the passage of Senate Bill 1444 in this past legislative session, it provided school districts the options or the opportunity to consider other health care options outside of TRS active care. We've discussed this several times in workshop through the course of this fall, and here with additional information, a very thorough presentation. This will be an action item in a regular meeting this evening. But here with presentation in detail leading up to that is our Chief Administrative Officer, Ms. Molly Perry. Ms. Perry?
Thank you, Mr. Let's try that again. How are we doing? All right. Thank you, Mr. Martindale. Good evening, Mr. Horak, members of the board. It is my pleasure to be here this evening after many months of work in this particular area to provide an overview, some new information, some additional context to help form a recommendation to the board, as Mr. Martindale said, at the regular meeting this evening. So the plan for this particular update is to really begin with just a review and some reminders around the flexibilities and opportunities that have been afforded to districts through the passage of Senate Bill 1444 related to employee health care, as well as the subsequent response by the district. Then we're going to walk through some new information around some upcoming changes with TRS Active Care, and then finally discuss our available options and the steps that the district would need to take should we decide to discontinue participation in TRS Active Care. So first and foremost, Senate Bill 1444 does provide those flexibilities for districts to opt in and out. Specifically for us, as a participating member of active care, we would be allowed to opt out of participation as early as September 1 of 2022, which is the beginning of the next plan year. If we were to make that determination for the new plan year, it would be binding for 5 years, and we would have to provide that notice to TRS by December 31st. And that is a really important aspect of our conversation this evening, because the timeline on these decisions and next steps are essential. So as I'm sure you all recall, we did charter a committee to really research and provide some guidance to the administration around this issue back in August. The purpose of that committee was to really evaluate the history of our healthcare with TRS, to evaluate the new options related to new legislation, and make those recommendations regarding the next course of action. With the guidance of that committee, we went through a process to look at those different options, and over the course of 3 meetings in late August and through September, developed consensus that that committee wanted to give us the green light as an administration to move forward, and assuming that all looked as favorable as we were seeing at that point to move forward. Of course, there was a lot of additional, what we'll call subsequent work that was to be done before we felt comfortable and confident in providing a recommendation in this area. So we, after the committee met, formed a working group of district administration. That group consisted of myself, Mr. Martindale, Amy Draws, our CFO, Thad Lassiter, our business director, and Nkrumah Dixon, our director of employee engagement, who works very closely with our employees on benefits. By working with that great group of folks, we were able to go through a process of looking at potential consultants. We interviewed 3. We have not made any formal agreement with any consultant at this point, but we, through this process, learned a lot. And one of those things was the second analysis of our TRS claims data. As you may recall, we provided a request to TRS early in the fall, and they were then able to send us our premium and claims information for the past 3 years, beginning in the 18-19 year. And that second claims analysis did validate what we learned the first time, that our premiums paid did exceed those claims for the last 3 years. And we'll speak in a little more detail about what specifically that looked like in a moment. Next, we learned some new things regarding not just self-funded plans in the open market, but a program called TASB Health that is a new plan, although it is tethered to existing plans. And much like the previous bullet, we'll speak in more detail around what that would look like and entail in a moment. We then analyzed the processes and associated timelines that we would need to go through in order to make this transition as seamlessly as possible to either a partial, fully, or self-funded plan outside of TRS by that September 1 new plan year. And lastly, we really looked at those preliminary details and options available based upon both our claims history as well as our existing participant pool. So a little more around that 3-year analysis. As I mentioned, this was information specifically from TRS around our claims data. It was the 18-19, 19-20, and 20-21 plan years. It included both medical and pharmaceutical costs. And so the numbers you see here are a cumulative total for those 3 years combined of our premiums paid, which fell just under the $21 million mark, and then our claims paid at about $19.3 million. So you can see here, just in that 3-year period, there was a surplus or an excess of premiums versus claims at the tune of $1.679 million. It is important to note, though, that this does exclude any sort of administrative overhead of the plan that would be an important component should we move into a self-funded plan, such as having an employee to administer the plan, in-house, looking at things like stop loss, et cetera. However, that being said, we feel confident that that would not be anywhere near the $1.6 million surplus that we noted here. TASB Health Plan, as I mentioned, was a new option that we learned about. We went into this process knowing that if we wanted to discontinue participation, that going to the open market would be risky in that we would have to make this determination and decision around discontinuation by the end of the 2021 year, December 31st, but that we wouldn't be able to get rates and lock in specific plans until later in the spring. The market is volatile, and most entities are not willing to provide that information this far in advance. However, with TASB Health, it is similar to TRS, a fully funded plan, and it is governed by a board of trustees. This plan is tethered to the Texas Municipal League, or TML, with over 900 local government entities around the state and over 35,000 employees in the pool. And so it is well established, even though TASB Health is new. This is an extension of that TML plan. Some of the things that are important to know about TASB Health is that we have those rate plans and options established and available now for the next plan year, which is further in advance than any other plan. We have those in hand. However, we're not bound to selecting TASB Health should we choose to leave this evening. That is an option that would remain on the table as we went through the process of exploring the market and making the determination about what is the very best choice for our employees. It is important to note that those rates and plans are very comparable. And when I say comparable, of course, they're not exactly the same, but they're very, very similar. In fact, there are even more options than what we have available to us with TRS Active Care. They do provide similar options in relation to the different kinds of high deductible versus plans that have various copays and out-of-pocket maxes, et cetera. There is good option here for continuity of care. And when I say that, it's important to know that this particular plan is with Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is the current TRS Active Care plan. So that would be very familiar for our employees if this was the option that we chose to ultimately go with. We do have a number of employees that are on the Baylor Scott & White HMO. And while the HMO aspect is not a part of TASB Health, those employees would have Baylor Scott & White as an in-network provider. So we do not expect any disruption in the providers for those individuals. They just would no longer be part of the HMO in order to access those services. Similar benefits also include things such as telehealth, an employee assistance program, much like we have currently. But one thing of particular note is that the prescription benefits under TASB Health are much better relative to TRS Active Care. So those are some highlights of TASB Health. And the other option, of course, as I've kind of mentioned and woven into the conversation as we've gone, would be to go with a self-funded option. This is something that we would need to do in the spring, where we work through a formal request for proposal or RFP process with the assistance of a consultant in order to determine what those various plans and options might be with different providers and establish who we would go with for a self-funded plan. This would require that we move into that administration within the district, that we really explore things like stop-loss coverage, that we do have our own plan administrator. So this could potentially be the better option, but there is no way to ultimately know that until we go through that formal process of RFP. All right, so we're going to switch gears for a little bit before we shift back to really pulling it all together and looking at our options moving forward. TRS, as I believe we have discussed in one of the recent updates to the board, has been really also responding to the changes of Senate Bill 1444. And most notably, they are moving to a regional rating system. Right now, across the state of Texas, regardless of where you reside or which district you work in, if you are a part of TRS Active Care, then you receive the same rates. Now, employer contributions do vary from district to district, but the rates themselves are the same. This move to regional ratings would begin in the new plan year, also September 1 of 2022, and they will be grouping districts by Education Service Center. So here in College Station ISD, we're part of Education Service Center Region 6, and so that would be the same region that we were with should we remain in active care. This rating is, again, completely responsive to 1444 and is an effort to sustain those TRS active care plans. We'll speak a little bit more about what I mean by that. But first, I want to talk a little bit about how TRS is going to calculate those regional ratings around the state. So they would begin with looking at that statewide average. So right now, everyone is at the statewide average because everyone pays the same rate. So that would be the baseline in the process of establishing regional ratings. The first step next would be to adjust those based on regional costs, then adjust for age, gender, and risk of the enrollees within the region. Next, they would calculate the cost of care and adjustments to establish the expected cost in the region, then take the expected cost alongside the historical costs to then adjust the regional rate to account for specific benefits of the plans as well as the network and providers available in that particular region. And then finally, look at the various types of coverage, so individual and children and family, to ultimately set those rates. So what would that look like if we had regional ratings today? TRS has done a comparison to statewide average to give districts a better understanding of what that means, because across the state, the costs per region do vary fairly significantly. So this chart we're looking at right now is based upon the current 21-22 plan year rates. It does not reflect any projected minimum increase, which we are hearing would be at least 5% with TRS. It really is just a side-by-side comparison. What if we had regional ratings today? So you've probably already had your eye drawn to Region 6, where we are, and seen that 0%. So what that really indicates is that here in Region 6, we are right at the state average today. If, in fact, TRS increases rates 5% next year, we would probably experience about a 5% increase here in College Station ISD. But if we look at other regions like 15, San Angelo, because they are already 5% lower, they would probably move up by 5% and level out to where we are today, thus not seeing an increase for the next plan year. So I really want to just take a moment and make sure that information is clear, because as an administrative team, we wanted to really pause and analyze what this would mean for us.
So the projected increase for Region 6 in 22-23 currently is TRS active care. What's the projected increase for
A
next
minimum
year?
of 5%
Okay.
is what we are hearing. However, those rates and plans would not be adopted by the TRS board until April and will likely be heavily influenced by the number of districts and total participants that opt out of participation. All right. So as you may have surmised, TRS is concerned about the longevity of their healthcare program for current employees. And one of the things that they have done to better capture the potential implications of these changes is initiate a simulation. So in this particular simulation, they looked at lower cost entities like College Station ISD, who are not typically recovering as much in claims as they are paying in premiums, with at least 500 employees, right? There are many districts around the state that are much smaller, but they wanted to look at those larger districts. And so in this simulation, they found that without regional rating, if these lower cost entities left, rates would increase by about 7%. It would compound every year and ultimately risk TRS to become insolvent over time. And so the impact of regional ratings is hopefully going to help sustain that system as districts who find themselves in a situation where it is more beneficial to their employees choose to discontinue their participation. Just a few more items from TRS, the first of which is a reflection upon our increase that we had here in the 21-22 current plan year. Across all of the plans, there was an average increase of 8%, meaning, of course, that some were greater and some were less, but average was 8%. TRS attributes 3% out of that 8 to the districts who were offering side-by-side plans. As you may recall, in some districts with their District of Innovation or DOI plan, they did not opt out of TRS, but they offered an additional plan through a self-funded option. And because so many of their participants chose that alternate plan, it decreased the pool of TRS participants, thus increasing costs to TRS. So we've already seen what the beginning of that potential change would look like, and certainly TRS is well aware of that and is making adjustments to try to compensate for the changes. And again, as a reminder, we would not know until April at the very earliest what those TRS rates and plans would look like. So let's review our options at this juncture. The first, moving left to right, would be to remain in TRS Active Care. We know this plan. We've been in this plan since the early 2000s when it became available, and at the time was the best option for College Station ISD. It is fully funded. Those rates and plans, again, would be established in earliest April 22 with that new regional rating system. We expect that the plans would likely be similar. There is no change of Blue Cross this year that is anticipated, but we generally don't know what those plans look like until summer. And we do know as well, if we choose to stay in TRS Active Care, that we would have the option again this time next year to discontinue participation because that is now part of statute. I think it's important for us to note as well that while it's available to us this year and next year, there will be another legislative session following that particular year. And so knowing whether or not TRS would continue to have this option would really depend on whether or not there was additional legislative action. Our next option would be to go with the TASB Health Plan, which is, again, a fully funded plan like Active Care. We know those rates and plans are comparable to existing rates and plans, and so we can anticipate with good confidence that our employees would not experience a rate increase for 22-23 as long as they chose a comparable plan to their existing. And then finally, we have the option of free market, where we would move to a self-funded plan. We would go through that formal RFP process to explore our options and ultimately make a determination regarding what is best for our employees. So knowing those three options, I want to go just through all of that information in one concise slide so that we can all then think about what those next steps would look like. So we know we have these new options under 1444 to discontinue active care with the understanding that we have TASB Health Plan available as an option, even if we do decide to go to the market and explore what that could look like for our employees. We know that active care rates have increased significantly over the past several years and are expected to continue to increase in the new plan year. We know that our claims data over a 3-year period indicates that our employees have paid premiums in excess of $1.68 million relative to claims. The future of TRS Active Care is really uncertain right now with all of these adjustments, and our deadline for the new plan year is coming up at the end of this month. That does fall in advance of our ability to fully go through the process and identify a self-funded plan. TASB Health does offer that fully funded plan with comparable plans and rates to our existing active care rates and plans in the current year. And finally, we would explore those self-funded options and make a final recommendation in spring 22 should we decide to discontinue active care participation. So assuming that we were to move forward and the board were to accept that recommendation, the first order of business would be board action and adoption of a resolution at the regular meeting this evening. We would then notify TRS in advance of the deadline on December 31. In January, we would anticipate entering into an agreement with a consultant to assist with that transition process, test the market, and then likely move into a formal RFP. Ultimately, when we make that determination around either TASB Health or a self-funded plan, we would, of course, have a significant communication plan with our employees to ensure that they are very, very well aware of not only the change, but what that means for them individually and how to have a seamless transition in this process so that we would be able to begin those new plans on September 1 of 2022. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I don't think I have any questions. I really think you went through everything very well, describing it kind of that benefits versus the costs. And I think you made a clear argument that, at least for now, that TRS is not, doesn't make sense for us to stay with them certainly for the cost factor. And we have this nice step to move to the TASB Health. And then I heard you just say just a minute or so ago that really that kind of will be on the table still in the spring, TASB Health compared to the self-funded at that point in time, right? Is that?
Absolutely. TASB Health has really mitigated that risk for us to step away from TRS and move into options outside of that system.
Has there been any negative feedback from the staff as to leaving TRS?
So we have, in addition to the committee work, we've provided ongoing communication, of course, in our board recaps that Mr. Glenwinkle sends out, as well as the newsletters from Dr. Dixon's office, and we've not received any negative feedback. Initially, there was some concern with the committee just around the risk of leaving, but I think through the course of the fall, the work that we've done and the new learning around TASB Health has definitely alleviated those concerns.
We've provided updates or communication associated with this also in various committee meetings the last couple of months, of which a number of you are members. It is a huge undertaking. And I compliment Ms. Perry, Dr. Dixon, and I know Dr. Dixon has a guest here with us that Molly may introduce here in a moment. And I think I made this comment last month, Kimberly. With TASB Health in hand, and it's absolutely comparable to what our employees have now, the coverage and the rates for 22, 23 relative to the rates they're paying in 21, 22, having that there as, in my mind, a worst-case scenario, which is equal to what we're doing right now before we go to the market. And you saw our premium payments relative to our claims. That data would indicate that, of course, the market is volatile. I will say that. But that data would indicate that the free market might be rather friendly to us. It is, but you all, many of you have said in this, we give employees raises, and then the new premiums come out from TRS Active Care, and it's just, it tends to trump whatever raises we can give our employees. So, and when I see $1.6 million over 3 years, I believe that we are, in terms of healthy district, so to speak, and we're covering the cost for some other districts that are upside down in the system. And so, again, with the TASB Health, the work of Molly, Amy, Dr. Dixon, those folks, I think we have, I don't even think TASB Health is a safety net. I think it's a very comparable landing spot that could only, I think, get better for us.
Yeah, it's a good option, and I mean, and it looks the way you presented, right? Our employees could actually have comparable benefits, same benefits for less cost than it would be if we had TRS next year, right? Because you said we already know the cost for the TASB Health, and the TRS is expected to be at least the 5% increase. So is that a fair statement that we?
It is.
think
I
that-
just to reiterate, we have these plans in hand that are comparable in rates and price to existing plans, and so we do feel like we could move to TASB Health if that was the ultimate decision, without experiencing those rate increases that are sure to come if we were to stay with TRS Active Care for the new plan year.
Thanks for saying that more clearly. And I'll just say it was great, made it easier to see and make the decision when you have that map that said that our rates, we would be at that 0%. We would not get the benefit. So that was nice that information was provided. So that made it even clearer.
We appreciate TRS providing that information.
Well, and I sat in on this committee back starting in August, shared some stuff through different board meetings. And I think that's the biggest part, was just finding what was going to protect the employees of the district going forward if we did, lack of a better, pull the plug on this and see where we're going. And to have that TASB option on the table, but then also knowing that TRS is probably going to go up, and they're probably going to have to salvage something, because who knows how many people are leaving. You can't operate, so they're going to have to find their funding somewhere. Hopefully it's not state of Texas, but we'll deal with that. It's not our problem. But when you look at that and looking at the options that could be out there, and like Mr. Martindale said, the free market in itself, everybody's going to, and I've said it from the beginning, everybody's going to be competing for everybody's business. And when you have that, the consumer's usually the winner. So that's hopefully where we'll end up, knock on wood. So anything else? All right. We will move. Thank you, Ms. Perry. Appreciate it. We will move to item 3, receive annual enrollment report from Templeton Demographics. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Horak and board members. Ms. Perry is going to get Mr. Gardner all set up. Rocky, have a seat. I'll introduce you to the group. Rocky Gardner from Templeton Demographics, Zonda Education. I'm not sure how to refer to you guys these days. Bob Templeton for veteran board members. Bob has come the last few years to provide our annual demographic update this time of the year. Actually, Rocky was, I think, the original. Rocky, we go way back to the very beginning, right?
Yes, sir.
So Rocky's here to provide College Station ISD with enrollment update. Just a few things on this. Rocky and their projections will yield some 10-year numbers. Remember, the second part of this, Ms. Strauss will take the data that Rocky shares with us, and in the regular meeting this evening, apply local FC policy local, which utilizes a 5-year projection, looks at our capacity of our facilities and those types of things. So Rocky's going to give us, the projection for 10 years out, what's going on in different neighborhoods, that type of information. And then Amy will take it to the next level at the regular meeting when she applies local policy. So it's good to see you again, Rocky. With that, I'm going to stop talking and turn things over to you.
Perfect. It's a pleasure to be back in College Station. It's it's nice. I actually, my wife's an Aggie and my son's an Aggie and he married an Aggie. So I spent a lot of time here. I never got to go here, but so I love being back in College Station, and my favorite football team too, by the way. So it's good. It's good to be back. And Bob's been doing the projections. this first slide, I think, is as your enrollment, kind of where we are today, 14,209. I think Bob's projection was about 20 of that. So Bob, he really kind of had a good handle on what he felt was going to be what we were calling a COVID bounce back. So a big number there, but that's a big number because a lot of those students were in your district prior and they're just coming back now. So we had some strong growth there. And unemployment rates began to drop during the last year, and they just stayed falling, and now they're down to what I would call full employment. When economists look at the economy, they usually say 5% is full employment. After that, you're kind of, everyone that really wants a job has a job, and if you go anywhere, I think any school district, any restaurant, they're all looking to hire people and they can't find them. So the job market is definitely strong, and that's of course keeping the housing market strong. So with that, monthly home sales, in College Station, again, it's kind of fun to be back because median home prices have, everything's changed since I was here last, but, sales went from 2,366 to 3,130 in just 1 year. Average price has gone up by about 30,000, and the median price has gone up by about 20,000. So strong increases in price point, which we're seeing throughout the state, really throughout the country. Total listings are down, and months inventory is down, and that's expected in a market like this. When you're in a seller's market, they're not on the market very long, so the inventory begins to drop down. We like to see a 3 to 6 month inventory if you got a real healthy inventory, and it's just low. It's low now, and I think many home sellers are seeing bids for their homes. They're seeing multiple buyers, so it's a really strong economy. Housing market. If you look at your annual sales, now this is based on deed transactions for College Station ISD specific. So our team pulls all the deed transactions for the district for the last 10 plus years, and we look at what's been going on. You can see 2,348 home sales. That's the most home sales that we've seen in the history that we've been tracking. New homes sitting around 341, but keep in mind that's year to date. So you'll probably get right up near 400 by the end of the month because this was actually through September. So keep in mind that there's another 4 months, October 3, if I do math right. I just have to be close. I don't have to be perfect sometimes. So my math is three or four. So strong housing starts. And again, the housing price, this is based on the deed transaction. It's a little bit different dynamic, but very similar. You can see that new home prices have increased by over 100,000 in College Station since 2010. Existing home prices have done very similar. So I don't know if that means the new affordable is 300,000, but that's a pretty good deal actually. In some of the other places I've been, I think that's a great option. So we're seeing some really strong increases in the housing market. And then, of course, the multifamily market, it's a little bit different being in College Station than a lot of other places because so much of the multifamilies are student-based. But you're seeing 94.1% occupancy. And again, I think that's because you're in a college community. Most of the areas are seeing closer to 90% occupancy. Things dipped down below 90% during COVID. They've now come back to what they would call over 90, which is kind of where a healthy spot for apartment complexes. So average concessions are down. So they aren't having to offer. They're not having to pay people to come. They're coming and looking for apartments without that. And again, we're tracking development. So we've got approximately 845 lots that are available to be built on right now in 23 subdivisions. So that means the infrastructure's in, everything's ready to go. They can turnkey tomorrow. There's more than 4,000 planned future lots within 5 future subdivisions, and groundwork's underway on 230 of these. So where you see that red outline, that's areas where they're moving more dirt to deliver more lots, which we need to do to keep on pace. So they got to keep delivering lots to keep building at the pace that they're building right now. And within the district, there's approximately 959 multifamily units under construction. 146 of those are future multifamily units, and 430 of those are student housing. So keep in mind, again, it's almost half of that is student housing that's being built right now. Or students can live in any of them, but they're really targeting the students. And then just a couple of these developments, I think this is, again, really interesting to me. The picture on the left is based on some new aerial photography that we've secured through a company called Bird Eye that has really current aerials. So those aerials were taken in June of 21 on the left side there with phase 103, phase 119, and 102. You can see the new housing. You can see how different it was. When I was here, it was still a racetrack. Actually, I think they were still racing when I was here. So now things have changed a little bit. And the yield, you'll see a current yield there of 0.45. That yield is number of students per home. Those are College Station students, not total students. We know that there's other students. So, but basically what that's saying is you're getting about 5 students for every 10 homes built in that development. I think it's a good way to think of that. As you try to think of what that will be at build out, then you're talking about, close to 1,000 students living in that development at build out.
And that's Southern Point you mentioned out at the old racetrack site.
Right. Yeah,
correct?
that's all Southern Point there. If we look at Pebble Creek, 1,800 total lots. Again, we're yielding about 0.45. They closed 10 homes in the last 12 months. So not just flying out, but again, as they're going, you're getting a student for about one student for every 2 homes. So you're certainly going to see a lot of students out there eventually. And Brewster Point, another one that has a great aerial there on the left that shows how much it's changed in just a short time from just some roads a year ago to now having, pretty much a full phase built out there, yielding 0.47. College Station's yields are pretty consistent, right around that 0.5. You got a couple higher and a couple lower, but they're coming in right around 0.5. This is Creek Meadows, 0.67. Again, that's a really strong yield, especially given there's 864 occupied homes. As that builds out, that might get a little bit lower. It might kind of level off a little bit, but that's a really good yield. And then you got the greens at Prairie Review. Only 22 occupied, but already a 0.5 yield, so you must have 11 students in there already.
Rocky, can you go back to the previous slide, please? I apologize. The Roosters Point, 160 lots, so 76 are occupied, 10 are under construction, so there's 38 additional future lots. So that's not a real large development, correct?
No, it's
Okay.
not real large.
And that's off, I think the board's probably familiar with Brewster Point. That's really kind of off the backside of Castlegate 2, near Spring Creek.
Right there near the elementary school. Yes, sir. Greens Prairie Review, 806 future lots. 22 of those are occupied. Again, just a few students there, but you can see that by the time school starts next year, that'll.
And Greens Prairie Reserve, everyone's familiar with where that is, across from, it's
right behind
basically across the street from Forest Ridge.
Yeah. And then, of course, Wellborn settlement there that's kind of north of that Greens Prairie Elementary, 115 total future lots. They're just beginning the groundwork there, so they're wanting to do about 20 homes a year. So you'll probably have 10 students there by the time school starts. I don't know. I'm not sure if they will. They're getting that groundwork going. It might be later, so it might not see real impact till 23. Then Winding Creek Estates has 87 lots. They got 17 occupied homes, just 2 students, but I think that yield will start climbing now that they're, they got 2 homes under construction as well. So they're kind of going to start turning those out right there off the top.
Yeah, I think the Wellborn settlement, there was lots of movement, but I don't think that much has occurred as of recent. So that may come about a little bit later than
Okay.
next year.
Might be more like 23. And Mission Ranch, that's 538 total lots. 125 of those are occupied now. The final phases are getting built. Again, you can see that aerial change fast. There's a lot of homes occupied there along the water, and you can see where they're building more. So they're looking at a 5-year build out, and that's price point right at over 350,000. Student yield again is right at 0.5. So it almost is kind of, the price point doesn't seem to impact the student yield. We're seeing a very similar yield in the $250,000 homes, just as we are in the over 350 homes. So it's very consistent. And Midtown Reserve, 724 total lots. You can see again nothing on the aerial just a year or so ago, and then we've got homes built there in June. So that's a really low yield in that D.R. Horton product. Kind of surprises me because D.R. Horton, but once D.R. Horton gets going, they build their homes pretty quick too. So just 92 occupied. I'd say that you're liable to have 30 or 40 students there by the time school starts next year.
But 0.2 yield for that.
It's just that product is typically yielding 0.5 to 0.6. So, and I think it will. I think you'll.
It's interesting how our yields are almost opposite, I think, probably what you experience in other places. So the lower price point is yielding less school-aged children, and you have 350 yielding half a unit.
Yeah, it is kind of different, but overall, your yield stays right
about
around
half.
0.5. This surprises me because that price point would be typically pretty high. I expect it to be and I think it still could get to 0.5 or 0.6 by the time they build through, they get a couple hundred homes on the ground. It could be that they started somewhere else when those homes were completed and just let their student finish. Some of these could come join after Christmas. You might see a little pickup in some of these neighborhoods as well. Multifamily analysis. So again, there's about 2,000 students that live in 20,000 apartments, and that's a really skewed, again, because of the college apartments, but that yield is 0.1. We usually see a yield closer to 0.3 in apartments, but it makes total sense considering where we're at. Manufactured home yields at 0.474, and even that's low because we usually see a manufactured yield that's close to 1. But again, I think you have a lot of students that live in manufactured housing as well. It really is and we consider manufactured homes multifamily because what we look at is one tract of land with multiple units on top of it. So just, they're all, it's a very similar in the way it's detailed. And of course, then there's 309 students that reside outside the district. So about 2% of your student body resides outside the school district. Those are likely employees, the students of employees. 77% of the students that reside within the College Station city limits, and 86% of the students in the district reside west of Highway 6. And I think they just kind of put that in there just to give you an idea of where your semblance is. So you've got another about 15% that are on the other side, obviously. Newcomer and leaver analysis. This is an interesting analysis that we started. We were able to begin once we had some good years of history. A newcomer in our book is a student that we didn't have a student ID for him last year, and in this year's, we have a student ID for him. And that's not a kindergarten. So if you're a 1st through 12th grader this year, and you weren't in the district last year, you'd be considered a newcomer because we have a student ID. A leaver is a student whose ID we geocoded last year, but this year we're not geocoding it. And that's a student that's in K through 11. We assume 12th graders to leave, obviously. So that K11. So you saw it's that COVID impact. You can see that big number at negative 385 in 2021. Your leavers jumped up. Now we could probably look at your newcomers this year and compare them to your 2019-20 and see if any of those were in the district prior, and they aren't really newcomers, they've just come back. And that's some analysis that we hope to do this spring and looking at some of the, just to kind of give us with districts that we have some history on, we can begin to see how much that's from new enrollment and how much of it is really just a comeback enrollment, if you will.
And 18, 19?
Well, we'd probably look at 1920.
Well, I was talking about our
Oh, 18, 19, yeah, I'm not really sure. Yeah.
charter opened.
Is that when the charter opened?
I was
Okay.
testing you. You were
Yeah,
here
see,
back then.
I wasn't.
You only do how many of these? You should remember that.
Bob, I remember it being discussed. I remember
Right.
it being discussed.
You were going to say that, but
Yeah,
right, okay.
that charter impact right there. It actually turned out to be less than we thought it was going to be, I think.
Yes, because I think initial projections were up around the 500 mark.
Yeah, I think so. I remember that discussion. Good catch. Thank you. So enrollment projections. So next year, 14,593, we're forecasting growth of almost 400 students. Keeping in mind that this year's number, we think a good share of that was bounce back. So that's why we're not holding that 545 number, but we're getting you back where you were, back in 1920. And then we're seeing that very consistent. It's all going to based on those the lot deliveries and the housing market. We build our forecast based on what we know about the housing market today. If a big shift occurs in the next year, then that could obviously cause a shift in our projections. But right now, it's been very steady. It's been kind of hanging in there. So we're seeing. We think you could have close to 16,000 students within 5 years, and certainly over 17,000 students within 10 years. And we also have it at the campus level too. Where you see highlights on this page is where your campus or our enrollment projection is 110% over the capacity that we have. So that's when there's really beginning to be some challenges, at that campus. So you can see that we've got Pebble Creek, Greens Prairie, and Southwood all hitting that number in about 4 years. and then you see the Pecan Trail out there. In real, beyond 5, it gets a little cloudy, of course, but that's kind of where we see the beginning of.
Yeah, this, and board members, this is where Amy will take FC local, kind of apply our capacity numbers, and she will, again, as I mentioned earlier, run it through 5 years. So you'll see some of this information that she'll break down at each particular level that kind of mirrors what Rocky's showing us. Again, they go out 10, but we'll use 5 for our FC local projections. And she will show you 2 different sets of capacity numbers, the 110%, and we'll use the range from 85% as well. So it will draw out campuses maybe that are running at a lesser capacity, as well as those that are topping the 110%.
I also have.
So Southwood Valley, that's Midtown, correct? So that's probably the Midtown that Rocky mentioned, kind of getting up and coming because they're zoned there. Pebble Creek is the southern point, the additional phases gaining some momentum in the out years. Pecan Trail is just a cumulative effect of the southwest portion of College Station continuing to grow.
I ask a quick question since on that. So when you're predicting this, so maybe you're saying maybe that's the Midtown. Do you use that lower student ratio that you actually see there now, or what do you use for the student ratio?
We tend to go higher than that. We tend to build our forecast based on what we think that yield's going to get to, because we know that those yields grow. They ebb and flow, but we know a 0.2 yield in those developments is not what they're really going to see. So we typically look at some of the other subdivisions around there, see what they've built out at, and so gives us that range to work towards. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. And we also have the middle and high schools here. So College Station High School is the one that pops up in yellow first, at almost 2,200 students in a couple years. And you see Wellborn Middle also there towards the end, getting some higher numbers. No surprises there. So enrollment did bounce back this year as forecasted. Single-family housing continues to 400 annual starts. Keep in mind, we had 800 vacant developed lots, so you've got a strong lot supply. I mean, if they even slowed down the deliveries, you could go at this pace for 2 years easily. So I do think that with this next 5 years, those forecasts are pretty solid. You get beyond 5 years, everything gets a little foggier. The 8 balls just doesn't get as clear for us sometimes, and we just have to kind of shake it up a little bit. But the single-family housing accelerating in Pebble Creek and Green Prairie, and then the enrollment, like I said, we're 15,800 in 5 years. So it could be pushing 16,000, and then again, 17,300 by 31-32. That's the story. Any questions?
Sure that you aren't letting
Good
Rocky
news.
walk out of here with no
Yeah.
questions.
You're going to test me just because it's like, well, Bob said.
Right. That's not the same number Bob gave us last
Yeah,
year.
that's what I was afraid of.
Can you go back to the high school slide
Sure.
with the middle school and high school? And again, I know Amy's going to touch on this later, but something I want to point out, and again, Amy will point this out as well, as I kind of look at College Station High School, I see 23, 24 projected just at 2,200. So if you look that projected out, even to 26, 27, the delta there is, 63 kids over the course of 4 to 5 years. So what we're recognizing is more of the enrollment movement at Consol, which was the intention several years ago when some adjustments were made and kind of slowing down the growth at College Station High School. Also, again, Amy will touch on these as we look out at Welborn, and that's 10 years out. I think other things that we have to be cognizant of are the enrollment and capacity at, for example, College Station Middle School. We got 1,000 projected at Welborn in 29-30, which is a long ways out. But we're also projected at 671 at CSMS. So those would be conversations on the horizon. And again, Amy will discuss those in more detail at the regular meeting.
Thanks.
I think I have a question. So with Pebble Creek and Southwood Valley gaining enrollment, I'm just kind of wondering, do you guys, whenever you see with house sales, are you seeing that number increase? What I'm asking more specifically is, are we seeing younger families move into, or families with students moving into Pebble Creek and moving into that Southwood Valley area? I mean, are we gaining quite a few from older houses that are selling?
I think, well, your yields have, well, what I saw, I took a quick look, so, but what I saw, the yields in existing housing have been pretty stable.
Okay.
And then your yields in some of the new stuff is a little lower, but it appears to be growing. What I think we're keeping an eye on, not just in College Station, but other places, are buyers that are buying kind of out of cycle. So you see young couples getting a house now that they, because they're just, either they're both working from home, they have opportunity to do that, or they just got tired of seeing each other every day in a one-bedroom apartment or something. And the interest, the rates are low, so the timing's right, which could mean that we see a little bit of a hiccup in those yields increasing until they start realizing now we're in the house, we can start having children. And I also think that, I mean, your kindergarten jump was really, that's kind of a good thing to see, because statewide, kindergarten's down like 10,000. I mean, not kindergarten, births were down like 10,000 in 2020. So we're going to see some lower kindergarten rates coming forward just because of the birth rates. And so it's all going to be about migration and kind of movement now for some of that. But we do, in answer to your question, that was probably a long, terrible answer, I'm not sure.
Well, it was a really
The
weird
yields-
question, too.
Well, the yields, we are trying to watch those. We do try to watch the yields to make sure we're not over-exaggerating a yield or seeing something that's underrepresented. And that's because they do start out, it's weird because you'll see some that start out really low, like that 0.2, and it could be a location thing, a timing
Right.
thing, or that they just hadn't registered yet, with just, a few of those.
To follow on that, I mean, is there any indication that College Station is having more retirees move here? I mean, are you able to get to that
If
level?
we start
Can I say
seeing,
granularity?
if we start seeing the yields
I
decline.
don't say granularity, but I know what you're talking about.
If we start seeing the yields decline, I don't remember, we have a slide, it's not in this one, we do have a slide where we track yields, over the years. So we could probably look at that slide and see if your yields have come down a little bit. When we first, 10 years ago when we were doing this, which we haven't been here quite 10 years, but 0.65 was the number we'd throw out everywhere where we go. Yields are 0.65. And about half of that, 0.35 of that was elementary. Now the yields are pretty consistently down around 0.5. So we know yields are decreasing, but that's a statewide. I think it's both burst decreasing. In some areas, it's, obviously college towns are big attractors to, retirees and stuff like that. I think that, so that could be that I just don't know the history enough to know whether they've come down. I just know where they're sitting today.
Got it.
That'd be a good question. I could visit with Bob about that.
Back to Geraldine's question, and I think you kind of touched on it, is the yields used to be, I mean, relative to price point, you could kind of project out the age of the child, because the younger families with the younger kiddos, by lower price point, generate equity in the home, then gradually increase the price point of the home they're living in as their kids aged. But with lower interest rates and those types of things, that's not necessarily holding true now. Is that correct? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, it doesn't
Okay.
appear to be. We've seen some crazy yields and some crazy expensive housing now. It's got a little bit defies logic sometimes. Certainly.
Well, that's why I was wondering how retirement played into that as well.
That's a good question here.
Yeah.
I would.
One question on this slide up here, just looking at that line that's the high school % growth from year to year, it not only dips a whole lot like in 5 or 6 years, but it actually goes negative. Is that that bubble?
It basically is. It's basically what you start seeing your grade sizes when you see some. You've got that third grade class in 962 that's going to eventually pass through the high school. You see some of those smaller classes. So as the smaller classes come and go, or the big classes exit, you start seeing some of that.
Yeah, it's just a lot, though. I mean, it's
Yeah.
to actually go.
But there's almost a 300 student difference between that third and ninth grade class, that would be the rationale. It's just those class sizes coming through there.
And following on her logic, do y'all consider that differential between the leavers and the newcomers when y'all do those projections?
Well, we're trying to understand those by area.
Okay.
It's more of a way for us to kind of validate what happened last year more than anything, just to see if it kind of makes sense to what we saw. Like that increase in leavers a year ago made sense because of COVID. That increase 3 years ago made sense, as Mr. Martindale said, because of the charter school. I didn't say that, but came from Mr. Martindale. So that definitely happens that way.
Anything else? Yeah, I remember when Nantucket was so far out. Things have changed. All right, if we have nothing else, thank you, Rocky.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Rocky, appreciate it.
Happy
Good to see
holidays,
you
guys.
again. Thank you.
Good to see you.
All right, we're going to move to item 4, consideration discussion regarding TASB Board Policy Update 118 and proposed new policies EHBAA local and EHB local. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Horak and board members. It is time to consider Policy Update 118, which is primarily our line share legal. There are some local policy implications, as well as a couple of other local policies that Ms. Perry will review that TASB has suggested that we revise. So with additional details on these items is our Chief Administrative Officer, Ms. Molly Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Martindale. Good evening again to Mr. Horak and all. In your packet stack, you will find a manila folder this evening. I know you all have received this information over the course of the last several weeks, but I thought it might be helpful to have a visual representation as we walk through some of these proposed changes. I'm actually going to start with the first 2 things on your stack in that manila folder this evening, which are proposed local policies EHB and EHBAA. These 2 policies are outside of the TASB Update 118, and they are at the recommendation of TASB in response to upcoming audits by TEA in the area of special education. The agency has initiated these new audits over the course of the last several years in response to their federal plan to improve special education services. These policies do not change anything regarding our practices. EHB specifically discusses regular training opportunities for teachers of students with dyslexia. And EHBAA addresses the transition for students who are receiving early childhood intervention or ECI services to ensure that we have developed and implemented an individualized education program or IEP by that child's 3rd birthday. And so these 2 particular policies, again, are new policies for us. However, they are at the recommendation of TASB to ensure compliance with what auditors will be looking for. Any questions?
And I apologize, Molly and Mr. Horak and board members. This is a first reading on these items.
Yes.
So as with any policy updates, we'll do 2 readings. The first reading, of course, is what Molly's going through now, just kind of reviewing those particular items with you. There's no particular action this evening. Any action on updating or adopting the changes to local policy would be recommended at the January board meeting. So again, with any policy updates, it's a 2-reading process.
Thank you for that clarification. Any question regarding EHB or EHBAA before we move to update 118? All right. You will also find in your packet the explanatory notes for Update 118 as well as the local policy comparison packet. What we'll do is we'll work through the local policies on the explanatory notes copy, which includes both legal and local policy. As a reminder, legal policy is not adopted by the board. Those are in state statute, and so there is no action required in those areas. However, local, there is some subjectivity and opportunity for us to discuss and revise if needed. So we do have 12 local policies in the explanatory notes, and then in that local policy comparison packet, if you have specific questions or wonderings around that particular policy, you can see the proposed language from TASB in the red line, blue line copy. So our explanatory notes packet does include 12 local policies, the first of which is on page 4, CFD local. So local is specifically in response, like most of the updates incorporated in response to legislative changes. This one in particular is yes, sir. The explanatory notes. Looks like this one. Oh, no. My apologies. I did not realize that we were missing. Let's shift gears and go over to the local policy comparison packet to ensure that you have what you need, and I will make sure that you have a copy of that as well. My apologies. So in the local policy comparison packet, the first one you will see is the policy that I was beginning to discuss, CFD local. This particular policy is going to align with recently adopted amendments to the Financial Accountability System Resource Guide, lovingly referred to as the FASREG, and it regards activity funds. To clarify that student activity funds are those funds that are raised and collected by student clubs and organizations, and that approval to spend those funds rests solely with the student organization or club, with disbursement management and approvals by the principal and sponsor. So that is CFD local. The next policy you'll find in your local policy comparison is the CQB local. So CQB local refers to required training specifically in the area of cybersecurity. This is in response to a change legislatively that does not continue the requirement for all employees to annually receive cybersecurity training. The local policy proposed would delegate authority to the superintendent to determine if and what frequency cybersecurity training is required. We do feel that this is really an important component of our system. However, this does give us more flexibility in terms of the frequency of that particular training. It also gives the superintendent the authority to impose consequences should an employee fail to comply or complete that required training within the timelines proposed. The next policy in your packet is DFE local. DFE is relating to resignation specifically of professional employees and who can accept that resignation. The language of this particular policy speaks to who would accept and allows for a board to determine if they choose to not be the entity that accepts, to designate specifically who that would be. Currently, resignations are received by the employee's immediate supervisor. And when the employee attempts to resign mid-contract or any time prior to the end of their current contract, that individual is sent to human resources in order to negotiate an exit. So our proposal is that we do consider a resolution in this particular area so that we can continue our existing practice of having immediate supervisors accept resignations that are at the end of the contract, and that any resignation that would be mid-contract would either go to the superintendent or our Director of Talent Management, Stormy Hickman. The next policy we'll look at is DP local. In DP local, we are continuing to speak a little bit about personnel. This, though, is in relation to Senate Bill 179 that mandates that the board adopt a policy requiring school counselors to spend 80% of their work time on duties that are components of a comprehensive school counseling program. This is a law that is designed to ensure that counselors are doing the job that they are intended to do. We are actually in the process of evaluating the comprehensive school counseling program document that outlines the duties and responsibilities to then align and ensure that our job descriptions and actual role responsibilities are in alignment. We are not recommending any adjustment to that 80% as a board could potentially do because we do think it's important that our counselors are spending the time on the duties that are outlined in that particular document. And so I want to just be clear that as an administration, we're working through that to ensure that we are in compliance. The next policy that we'll look at is EHAA local regarding required instruction. You all heard earlier in the semester quite a bit about some of the requirements that have been changing around curriculum instruction. This one in particular relates to requirements regarding human sexuality curriculum materials, which includes board policy on adopting those materials. The board policy proposed does follow those steps as required by law, including the School Health Advisory Council, or SHAC, holding those meetings and making recommendations to the board at a public meeting around any curriculum related to human sexuality, and that the board would confirm that those recommendations meet the requirements in law before taking action. EHBC local is the next policy we will look at. Again, coming out of our most recent regular legislative session, this policy is related to House Bill 4545 and does speak to accelerated instruction and the accelerated learning committees that are required by that law. It would direct parents to our local policy F&G regarding grievance if they have complaints about educational plans. And it also explains that if a parent requests assignment of a particular teacher, if after a student's unsatisfactory performance on grade 3, 5, and 8 math or reading assessments would be handled in accordance with administrative procedures. Of note, in EHBC, we have requested that TASB also incorporate an update to expand our local criteria for the definition of at-risk students. This is specifically requested to allow us additional flexibility in the use of our state comp ed funds, and specifically relating to the employment of our dyslexia teachers. That would give us some flexibility to potentially move those to state comp ed and meet the spend requirements that we have in that area. Next policy is EIE local, excuse me, regarding retention and promotion. This eliminates some outdated provisions on grade advancement as a result of House Bill 4545 and really just brings us into alignment with those new laws. FDE local is the 8th policy.
Molly, on the
Yes, sir.
EIE, this is the strike through that's reflective of 4545, and this is the wording adjustment recommended by TASB, correct? Okay.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
There's quite a bit in that particular policy around promotion standards, and so definitely want to take a look at that. But primarily, this is really in a result of the 4545 changes. FDE legal is the next local policy, and the recommended revisions in FDE local would expand the definition and amend the offense of continuous sexual abuse of a young child to also include a disabled individual. FEA local addresses compulsory attendance rules, and there is a new option under law to excuse absences for students who are at least 15 years old for 1 day to obtain a learner license and 1 day to obtain a driver's license. We do have in local policy the ability to restrict this absence. However, the TASB recommendation language proposed would allow, so that's certainly an area if there are particular thoughts or concerns we could discuss in further detail. FEC local relates to attendance for credit. And this particularly is in response to House Bill 699, and it creates an exception for absences resulting from a serious or life-threatening illness or related treatment. There would be administrative details related to that, and provisions would include what is best for this student, any extenuating circumstances and conditions for awarding credit, with really focusing more on the student's mastery of skills rather than attending programs for a specific amount of time. FFG, regarding student welfare, child abuse, and neglect. This is a change to the language in response to House Bill 3379 and would change the reporting standard from cause to believe to reasonable cause to believe. There's also an aspect of training, as of course we do provide child abuse prevention training for our staff, and so that would be in effect by August of 2022. Last on our list of local policy proposals in Update 118 this evening, FL Local is related to student records. And in this particular policy, they have stricken the outdated grade placement committee with a reference to accelerated learning committees in accordance with House Bill 4545. That concludes a brief overview of the policies that are proposed. If there are specific questions or additional research that the board would like for us to do as an administration between now and our next meeting in January, we would be happy to do that to ensure that any questions that you all have or considerations we might need to make are in place.
If you will email me, then I will make sure that it gets to Ms. Perry. And whatever clarification we need on that item, of course, I will respond to the collective group. So lots of information. So again, take a look at those. If something comes up between now and the January board meeting, if you'll let us know, then we'll do our best to provide that clarity. Come back for conversation and consideration at the January meeting at the second reading.
Anything else? Thank you, Ms. Perry. All right, that takes us to item 5, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to CSISD board operating procedures. Mr. Martindale.
All right, Mr. Horak, for the sake of time, I'm going to take a little twist on this one a little bit. We have a public hearing, our first reading at 6:30. We have just a little bit of a setup we need to do. So in lieu of trying to rush through this document in probably 10 minutes or less, I would ask that everyone take a look at board operating procedures that you have a hard copy of. If there are specific items of interest, email me, much like policy, and I will ensure that this is the first item on workshop in January so that we have ample time to go through it and review what's in place. I think it's working for us. I don't have particular suggested edits, but if there's something that the collective group would like to discuss, I would prefer us to have the appropriate time to do so instead of rushing that process now to make our public hearing time, if that's okay with you, Mr. President.
Fine with me. Any questions? Anything? All right. If nothing else, we'll adjourn and start at 6:30.